Welcome to Coyote's Corner. This episode, we'll be listening to Michael Lang tell Chulain earns his name.
On a warm summer's day, Concobar, king of Ulster, sat beneath the shade of an ash tree, playing a game of chess with his champion, Ferris MacRoy. While the two moved their armies across the board, the boy troop of Emain Macha played their games upon the playing field, hurling, wrestling, throwing their javelins. Concobar and Ferris were so engrossed in their game, they did not notice Satante running past them, clutching the hurling stick he'd taken, while his foster mother Detain was not looking. As Satante stepped upon the playing field, the older boys stopped their games. They turned and glared in his direction. Satante came forward a few steps. The boys began to throw their hurling balls at him, but Satante smiled and stood his ground, letting each of the balls deflect harmlessly off his chest. "What game shall we play now?" he asked. The boys narrowed their eyes even more. Their glowers grew darker. They threw their hurling sticks at Satante, but Satante dodged each one. "And now what game shall we play?" But the older boys became even more angry. They charged Satante and tackled him, but Satante was stronger than all of them combined. He threw them back, wrestling them until a fist struck him across the jaw. And at that, Satante became angry. The fairy blood within his veins began to boil, began to spasm and writhe, twisting around within his own skin. His left eye squeezed shut to a mere slit, while his right opened wide till all 7 concentric irises sparkled and gleamed with the radiance of the sun. His lips curled back in a snarl from ear to ear. His fingers curled backward. The hero's halo erupted from his body, showering the field in shimmering light. With one massive swing, he dropped 12 of the boys to the ground. He swung and he swung, till only one boy was left standing. Satante grabbed him by the collar. "Why did you attack me?" he shouted. "You broke the rules." And at that, Satante was no longer the inhuman creature he had become. He was a boy ashamed of what he had done. "What do you mean? What do you mean that I broke the rules?" "No one is allowed to step on the playing field without asking permission. Even King Concobar cannot." "I didn't know," Satante replied. He lowered his head. "I'm so sorry. I must make this right. I promise you, this will never happen again. Never again shall I raise my hand against any of you." Satante then reached out and clapped the boy across the shoulder, the way he had seen the warriors do in the halls of Emain Macha. He then reached out his hand to each of the fallen boys, helping them to their feet, apologizing to each one in turn. When Concobar and Ferris saw this, they looked to one another. If any other boy were to have said that, you and I would not have believed him. But look there. Look how Satante, the foster child of your own daughter, Concobar, look how he treats these boys. Concobar nodded. "Aye, your foster son. He is a warrior already, isn't he? Call him over here." And so Ferris arose to his feet, calling out to Satante. And when Satante heard the voice of one of his foster fathers, he bowed respectfully to all the boys and took his leave, racing to where Concobar and Ferris stood. "Aye, father. What is it?" "The king has something to tell you." Concobar smiled at Satante. "We saw what happened, and we heard what you said. Satante, I have no doubt the boys will soon accept you as one of their own, and we would be honored if you would join us this night in the house of Chulain. Chulain has invited myself and all the warriors of Emain Macha to join him for a feast." Satante was confused. I am not a warrior." "Not yet, but what you've shown us today, we are certain you will soon be one of us. Join us this evening, Satante." And so Satante agreed. He bowed respectfully to his foster father and his king, then he turned and ran back to the other boys, and the games continued, all through the afternoon and into the evening. Concobar and Ferris went back to their game, and soon they were so engrossed in unraveling each other's strategy, they forgot all about the invitation they'd made to Satante. That evening, when Concobar and Ferris left the fortress of Emain Macha, they were the last of the warriors to leave, but Satante soon followed after them, carrying his hurling stick and tossing a ball as he walked down the road to the house of Chulain. It was after dark when Ferris and Concobar arrived. Chulain greeted them as brothers, throwing his arms around each. "'Tis so good to see you. It's been so long since Concobar and all his warriors graced my house with their presence. Come in, sit yourself down." Concobar smiled in response. "Is there anyone else coming?" Chulain added. "I ask because I wish to turn out me hound for the night. He's a ferocious beast, but he guards us well by night." Still not recalling the invitation he'd made to Satante, Concobar looked around. He saw all his warriors gathered. "Aye, we are all here. Release your hound for the night." And so Chulain did. Then he joined Concobar and all the warriors of Emain Macha at his table. They feasted and drank. Ferris drained his cup twice. He was just reaching for the mead when the sound of howling came from outside the house. The warriors all ran to the window, and to their horror, they saw in the gloomy twilight Satante walking up the road. The dog was rushing towards him. "By Logue's bloody beard, Concobar, we forgot. We invited Satante to join us." Ferris drew his sword. In the faint torchlight of the house, it gleamed with all its rainbow hues. But even Ferris knew, running as fast as he could, he would not reach Satante in time. The warriors watched in helpless horror as the hound lunged at Satante. But Satante stood his ground. He reached out with one hand, stopping the dog's charge, catching it by the throat and holding it high. The dog stopped so suddenly, he did not even have time for a startled whimper before it was thrown to the ground with enough force to shake all of Ireland. Ferris then reached Satante. "Are you all right, lad?" "Aye, I'm all right." The other warriors gathered around, along with Chulain, and though Chulain did not blame Satante for what had happened, his heart was filled with sadness. "I fear now for what will happen. This hound, he guarded my house, my herd. What will become of us now?" Satante looked down at the dog's limp form. Then he looked to Chulain. "I am sorry for what has happened, Chulain. I will make this right. You select a puppy from any litter, and I will train that puppy to protect your home. And until he is ready to take his place as your guardian, Chulain, I will be your hound." The warriors all looked to one another, and they knew, as Concobar and Ferris did, that Satante would keep his word, and he would serve as the hound of Chulain. Cathbad the Druid then stepped from amongst the gathered warriors. "Let it be known by all, this boy will no longer be called Satante. Let his name be Cuchulain, the hound of Chulain. That is a name worthy of this boy." But Satante was confused. Why do I need a new name? What is wrong with Satante?" Cathbad laughed. "Satante is not a name for a warrior, lad. It is a name that will be forgotten in time. Cuchulain, that is a name that will be remembered, a name worthy of a hero's deeds." And so it was that Satante became Cuchulain, the name that he bore for all the rest of his days, the name that was remembered for all of his deeds.
That was Michael Lang telling Cuchulain earns his name. I'm sitting down with Michael now to get some background on that story and see where it came from. Thank you, Michael.
Absolutely, Toby.
So this is the second Ulster Cycle story that we've recorded here.
Yes, it is.
So what is this particular episode of the cycle all about?
Well, this piece more or less picks up from the birth of Cuchulain and really tells us of how this boy Satante becomes the hero Cuchulain. We see some of his deeds, but more importantly, we see his character and how he conducts himself. And that's what makes him stand out to Concobar the king and to Ferris McRoy, one of his foster fathers, is this theme that comes back again and again throughout the Ulster Cycle of the honorable warrior, the honorable hero, keeping your word, keeping promises.
Okay. And that was something that during editing the story itself, you and I discussed quite a bit of using the promises in the beginning half of the story and the latter half to tie it together.
Yes, in the Ulster Cycle, because of how the Irish mythology has been passed down through oral tradition, it is a very regional story, and there are a lot of differences in the story from one region to another, and as a result, there are many different versions of the story. And this particular part is often told as two independent stories that are both very short, but it is also sometimes told as one story, like what I did with it. And while telling it initially, our first take here on Coyote's Corner, it sounded very fractured, two different things happening. But as we discussed how to remedy that, we realized that the common theme is keeping your promise, keeping your word, and the idea that both Ferris and Concobar and then the other warriors realized that if anyone else had said what Satante just said, it would be laughed aside as boys talking. But they see that Satante is doing exactly what he said he was going to do. There's more to this kid than would be expected of someone his age.
So he's already fulfilling that archetype of the honorable warrior.
Correct.
From the youngling age of 5.
Yes. This story is supposed to happen when he's 5 years old or so, and already he is acting the way that a warrior should. In addition to this remarkable ability that he has to go into what's called the warp spasm, where he becomes this unearthly creature. It's where his supernatural origin really comes to life. And in this state throughout the story, he's unstoppable. But that's not what makes him such a great warrior and such a great hero. It is his human qualities of no matter what happens, he is the honorable warrior. Even when people aren't worthy of him keeping his word, we see later in the story that he keeps it. The fact that he is dealing with dishonorable or untrustworthy people, that does not give Chulain the right to break the promises he has made or take back his word.
Okay. Earlier in this conversation, you mentioned this is a highly regional story, and there are many, many different versions of it. That's come up a lot with a lot of the folk tales and the older stories, the traditional tales that you tell. How do you go through and select which versions of stories you use? You know, maybe a little bit from that piece and a little bit from this piece. What's your thought process in weeding out the wheat from the chaff, so to speak?
Yeah, it is very much a selection process, and it's very rare that I will take a single version in its entirety. This particular story, this particular cycle of myth, the Ulster Cycle, there are certain things that come up again and again and again. There are common themes that are brought out in all of the stories. To look at it as a series of episodes, each episode building off of the last one, to have those themes and present them, and what are the elements that are going to speak to that theme. As we said, the whole point of this story is that keeping your word and being honorable. And so to select the pieces that speak to that theme, but in addition, this is the first time in the Ulster Cycle where Chulain enters into the warp spasm. And so I felt it was very important to keep that element of what is the warp spasm? What does it look like? It's described in many different ways throughout the story, but there are common pieces of things that happen to him when he goes into this rage. That is important to show that for the first time, Chulain is not human. He has this power that makes him different. The other thing that is important, how he earns his name. That's what this story is all about. And so it is essential in this story, one way or another, that he kills that dog.
Yeah.
And as awful as that may sound, especially if this story is being used with a younger audience, that has to happen because he becomes the Hound of Chulain.
Yeah.
He has to replace that dog somehow. And there are many different ways that it's expressed in the story of how he actually commits that act. Some of them are much more gruesome than others. But the point is, he is being attacked by this vicious dog, and he protects himself. And in doing that, he kills the dog. But then he realizes how important this dog was to Chulain. And oh my goodness, I'm going to make this right.
Yeah.
And he does. And once again, the warriors all see Chulain, Satante. He is going to keep his word.
So really where, in the previous story, The Birth of Chulain, we set the stage, we introduced the players. This is really kind of introducing the different elements of the hero. hey, he really isn't human. We hinted at it last time. I mean, we found him on a ferry bound.
Right.
But now we introduce, oh, hey, he goes into this berserker rage. So that's a known factor for the populace surrounding him, for the king, for his foster parents. But we also introduce him as that archetype of the honorable hero.
Yes, and I think in a way, this story also allows him to really be at the beginning of the hero cycle, because even though he is this supernatural being, what he has inside of him that makes him so great is a very human aspect. It is his honor and what he will do for honor's sake. That is something that any ordinary person can have within them that will make them go and do great deeds, and that is where the hero begins, is that simple person who sets out on a journey. And as the story of Chulain unfolds, we see how he is called upon to do superhuman things. And even though he has this supernatural aspect to him, again and again, it is that human side of him that makes him more heroic.
Well, thank you so much for sitting down and talking about this episode of the Ulster Cycle with us.
Absolutely.
And to our audience out there, thank you for tuning in. If you want to hear more from Michael, check out his website, coyotesinc.com, where you can listen to a bunch of previously recorded stories, check out Mike's schedule, and see his other works out there.
And as always, don't forget to like, favorite, share, subscribe, so you never miss anything that we're doing here.
And until next time, this has been Coyote's Corner.